Atlantis was real, and they've done everything they can to make sure you never take that sentence seriously. The greatest cover-up wasn't a war or a scandal, it was the erasure of a civilization that knew too much. Not just about the Earth, but about reality itself. You were told it was a myth, a fable for philosophers and dreamers. But what if the stories were never fiction? What if they were warnings? Because the deeper you go, the more it all starts to connect. The ruins we can't explain, the symbols that keep repeating, the ancient sciences we pretend to rediscover every few decades. None of it is random. Atlantis wasn't lost, it was buried, not under the ocean, but under layers of misdirection, dogma, and fear. And the teachings they left behind, they weren't mystical riddles, they were instructions, a manual for human potential. And the ones in power knew it. That's why they buried it. Because if you knew what they knew, you'd never look at this world the same way again. Everything you've ever been taught about the origins of civilization is upside down. The mainstream story is simple. Humans were primitive, then slowly evolved. Agriculture, tools, cities, eventually modern science. But buried under that neat timeline is a secret that rewrites all of it. Atlantis wasn't a myth. It was the origin point, not just of culture, but of consciousness itself. Before Egypt, before Sumer, before any recorded history we're allowed to talk about, there was a society so advanced it could manipulate energy, time, and reality with a precision we still don't understand. They left behind clues, scattered like breadcrumbs across the ancient world. The precision of the pyramids, the astronomical alignments of megalithic structures, civilizations that rose suddenly, fully formed, with knowledge far beyond what should have been possible at their time. We call it a mystery. But the truth is, it's a memory. These weren't independent achievements. They were echoes of Atlantis, fragments of a once unified science passed down through survivors, encoded into architecture, symbols, and oral traditions. You can see it in the ancient city plans, the sacred geometry embedded in temples and ziggurats, the obsessive alignment with celestial bodies. These weren't decorative choices. They were technical, Atlantean engineering made manifest. Geometry wasn't math, it was magic. Language wasn't communication, it was resonance. Art wasn't aesthetic, it was technology. Everything served a deeper function, a code that interfaced with the fabric of reality itself. Think about how absurd it is that we still can't recreate the Great Pyramid using modern equipment. That we still don't know how sites like Baalbek or Pumapunku were constructed with stones weighing hundreds of tons, placed with surgical precision. We shrug and say aliens, or primitive brilliance. But the truth is, we're not at the top of human development. We're the echo of something greater. We inherited ruins and called ourselves builders. We discovered pieces and convinced ourselves we were the first to ever think. Atlantean knowledge didn't disappear. It was dismembered, dismantled and scattered, piece by piece, so that no one would hold the full picture again. But the fragments are still here, hidden in myths, rituals, secret societies, and symbols that decorate the halls of modern power. We've just forgotten how to read them. And there's a reason you won't hear this in school or see it on the History Channel. Some knowledge is too disruptive, too dangerous. That's why we've created something different. If you want to go deeper, where the real story begins, sign up for our free newsletter, Insights Academy, using the link in the description. We share what can't be said here. For a limited time, you'll also get a free copy of The Kybalion. This isn't a quest for fantasy. It's the recovery of a system, one that mapped the stars and the soul, that saw human beings not as random accidents but as engineered participants in a much larger design. Atlantis didn't influence the ancient world. It created it. The Greeks, the Egyptians, the Babylonians, they didn't invent metaphysics or sacred law. They inherited it, translated it, watered it down, and sometimes distorted it. But the source remained, and that source was Atlantis. And this is where it starts to get uncomfortable. Because if this knowledge existed, and if it was preserved by a select few across centuries, then that means our modern culture, our science, our religions, our institutions aren't products of progress. They're deliberate deviations from a system that once worked. We didn't evolve past Atlantis. We regressed from it. And the moment we begin to accept that, the entire story of who we are starts to unravel. The greatest deception ever sold to humanity wasn't political, wasn't economic, it was spiritual. You were taught that consciousness is a byproduct of biology, that your soul, if it exists at all, is vague, mystical, unknowable. But the Atlanteans didn't see it that way. To them, the soul wasn't some abstract idea. It was a science, a force, structured and intentional, a multidimensional being undergoing cycles of learning, evolution, and refinement across time. You weren't born by accident. You were placed here, now, for a reason. And once you understand the system they described, your entire perception of reality starts to shift. The Atlantean cosmology was layered. Reality, they said, wasn't just physical matter. It was vibrational, stratified into dimensions, each with its own rules, each playing a role in shaping consciousness. What we call death was simply a shift in frequency. Life was school. Rebirth was the curriculum. Karma wasn't punishment. It was correction, designed to bring you into balance with natural law. In this view, the universe wasn't a cold machine. It was a living mirror, reflecting your state of being back at you through experience. They believed the human body was a vehicle, a transceiver of consciousness, not the source of it. Just like a radio doesn't create music, it receives it. The soul was the true self, and the physical was its current avatar, playing a role in a much longer story. And if that's true, then it means your life, your struggles, your pain, they're not meaningless. They're feedback, invitations to evolve. That's the difference. While modern science tells you consciousness ends at death, the Atlanteans knew that death was just a door, and the soul never stops walking through them. They mapped this process in precise terms. Initiation wasn't ritual. It was psychological engineering. The inner alchemy of dissolving the ego, confronting the shadow, and refining the self into something aligned with universal law. Their temples were not just places of worship. They were schools, laboratories of the soul. The priests were not moral authorities. They were scientists of consciousness, guiding initiates through carefully structured rites, designed to activate dormant faculties within the self. We call these things esoteric. We wrap them in mysticism and myth, but they didn't. To them, the pineal gland was a gateway. Breathwork, sound, symbol, these were not spiritual fads. They were tools. The same way you'd use a microscope to study bacteria, they used consciousness itself to access higher planes of understanding. Astral projection, remote viewing, telepathy. These weren't fringe ideas, they were disciplines. Trained, practiced, mastered. Think about that. You've been told that consciousness is unknowable, that your inner life is a mystery. But what if it isn't? What if the blueprint to unlock it was written long before our modern sciences ever caught up? And what if the reason we never hear about it isn't because it didn't work, but because it worked too well? See, knowledge of the soul isn't profitable. It makes you ungovernable. You stop fearing death. You stop chasing validation. You stop looking outside yourself for meaning and start building it from the inside out. And that makes you dangerous to the system. Because the moment you realize that everything you are is already complete, already eternal, you become impossible to control. This is the core of the Atlantean teaching, that you are not here to survive, you're here to evolve. And the only real failure is forgetting that. The moment you reduce yourself to biology, to matter, to consumer, you've already lost the thread. You've already stepped off the path. But the good news? The path is always there. Buried, maybe. Forgotten, but not erased. The soul never loses its map. It only forgets how to read it. And that's why these teachings matter now more than ever. Because in a world that pushes you toward distraction, disconnection, and dependency, the Atlantean system pulls you back to the core, to inner mastery, to self-sovereignty. And if even a fraction of what they knew is true, then the future of humanity depends not on building smarter machines, but on remembering what it means to be fully human. What if everything you've been told about energy is outdated by design? The way we burn, extract, and destroy to power our world isn't innovation, it's desperation. A civilization operating on survival mode. But the Atlanteans didn't operate that way. They didn't burn to generate power. They resonated. They didn't wire circuits. They aligned fields. They understood something that modern science is only starting to rediscover, that everything, thought, matter, emotion, is frequency. And if you control frequency, you control form. That was the foundation of their technology. It wasn't mechanical. It was harmonic. Crystals weren't decorative. They were databanks, amplifiers, energy stabilizers. The myths of giant crystals powering the Atlantean cities aren't fantasy, they're fragments of memory. Quartz, tourmaline, obsidian, each had a purpose. Not just for healing or meditation, but for actual energy generation, planetary stabilization, even communication over distance. They used resonance fields to tap into Earth's magnetic grid, what we now call ley lines. These weren't just mystical ideas, they were the Atlantean version of infrastructure. Their version of Wi-Fi was planetary, invisible, and organic. They harnessed sound, too. Cymatics, sound-shaping matter, was part of their language. Tuning forks, chanting, harmonics, all were tools to restructure water, stimulate plant growth, and open consciousness. Think about that. What we consider spiritual woo was their advanced physics. The chants that align chakras, the singing bowls, these weren't traditions, they were technologies. The ancients weren't primitive, they were precise. They didn't lose this knowledge. We did. Or more accurately, it was taken from us. Because frequency is power, and power, when left in the hands of the awakened, becomes unmanageable to those who build empires on submission. What do you think happens when a civilization realizes they don't need fossil fuels or electricity to thrive? What happens when people understand they can heal with sound, shift their consciousness with intention, or access data through crystalline resonance without ever logging into a machine? You get a society that doesn't depend on gatekeepers. You get sovereignty. And that is exactly what got Atlantis destroyed. Not by some natural cataclysm alone, but by the internal decay of their own integrity. Somewhere along the line, the Atlanteans began to misuse the very tools that once aligned them with nature. They turned frequency into manipulation. They amplified energy without wisdom. They split timelines. They fractured consciousness. In short, they began to weaponize what was sacred. Imagine a sound field that can heal organs. Now imagine it inverted to shatter them. Imagine a crystal grid that can stabilize a region's weather. Now imagine it used to disrupt and displace. The same tools that could awaken a soul could also trap one. This is the real story behind the fall of Atlantis. It wasn't just a flood. It was a spiritual collapse, technology outpacing wisdom, power outgrowing responsibility. Sound familiar? Look around. We've recreated the same dynamic. We build machines that run faster than our ethics. We develop AI, but we don't know ourselves. We manipulate emotion through media frequencies. We surround ourselves with electromagnetic fog and wonder why we're anxious, sick, and disconnected. The Atlanteans warned of this, through myth, through symbol, through the ruins we've refused to understand. But there's something else, a whisper beneath the warnings, because not all Atlanteans fell. Some preserved the knowledge, carried it across oceans, encoded it in temples, hid it in mystery schools and oral lineages, waiting for a generation not just advanced enough to decode it, but conscious enough to wield it responsibly. And here we are, standing on the edge of the same mistake, or the beginning of something entirely new. You were never meant to be powerless. You were meant to be a frequency being, capable of tuning yourself, healing others, harmonizing with the planet. That knowledge isn't lost. It's buried in you, crystallized in your DNA, waiting to be remembered. You've seen the symbols, the spirals, the triangles, the eyes, the grids. They appear everywhere, on ancient walls, in sacred temples, etched into crop fields, even embedded into corporate logos. You were told they're decorative. Coincidence. Just the artistic expressions of ancient people with too much time on their hands. But what if they're not? What if those symbols are part of a language, not a human one, but a universal one? A code. A precise, intelligent structure built into the very architecture of reality. The Atlanteans understood this language. They spoke it fluently. And they used it to build, to heal, to teach, and to evolve. Sacred geometry wasn't an aesthetic to them. It was functional. It was the interface between energy and matter. Every form, whether a snowflake, a seashell, or a galaxy, follows geometric laws. The flower of life, the seed of life, the golden ratio. These weren't spiritual decorations. They were blueprints. Templates used to create resonance between the human field and the larger field of the cosmos. The Atlanteans didn't just observe these patterns. They used them, consciously and systematically, to stabilize energy, amplify intention, and structure consciousness. The Vesica Piscis, for example, two intersecting circles, is the basis of all geometric creation. It's the womb of sacred proportion. They encoded it into architecture, temples, initiation chambers. Why? Because it's a portal, a resonance point between dimensions. Just like a tuning fork creates sympathetic vibration, these shapes created harmony between the physical and the metaphysical. Geometry was the bridge between realms. Now think about this. Why do these same symbols appear in cultures that supposedly never met? Why does the same spiral form show up in Celtic stones, Mayan pyramids, Aboriginal cave art, and Himalayan mandalas? Did they all just happen to stumble on the same artistic trends? Or were they remembering the same source, the same code, passed down from a time before memory, from people who understood how to build not just with stone, but with vibration, intention, and law? Atlanteans saw the universe as a geometric symphony, each form, each ratio, a note in the song of creation. And when something fell out of alignment, the solution wasn't to control or destroy it, but to realign it with its natural frequency. Disease, dissonance, mental illness, these weren't permanent problems. They were symptoms of misalignment, and sacred geometry was one of the keys to restoring harmony. Today, we've inverted this. We treat symptoms. We label dissonance as disorder. We use chemicals and machines to override the body's natural systems, instead of working with the code. We build cities in straight lines, ignoring the curves and spirals that define life. We surround ourselves with architecture that distorts, rather than amplifies, natural resonance. No wonder we're sick. No wonder we're disconnected. We've lost the map. But that map still exists. Not just in ancient temples or encoded glyphs, but in you. Your body follows sacred geometry. Your DNA spirals with phi. Your heartbeat, your breath, your brainwaves, all function according to ratios the Atlanteans mapped long ago. You are not separate from the code. You are made of it. And the moment you begin to see it, to feel it, to realign with it, something happens. Life stops being random. Patterns emerge. Synchronicity increases. Clarity returns. Because you're no longer fighting the current. You're moving with it. This is what the symbols were trying to tell you. That the universe isn't chaotic. It's structured, intelligent, and alive. That consciousness isn't accidental. It's by design. That suffering isn't permanent. It's misalignment. And that the truth isn't hidden. It's coded into everything, waiting for you to remember how to read it. The Atlanteans didn't invent sacred geometry. They remembered it. And now, so can you. Atlantis didn't fall because of a flood. The water came later. What destroyed it was something far more dangerous: arrogance. Not the kind you find in personal ego, but a collective arrogance. A civilization that believed it had mastered the laws of nature so completely, it no longer needed to honor them. That was the real collapse. Not just of structures, but of balance. They reached the peak of technological and spiritual advancement, and then severed the connection between the two. They forgot that power without wisdom is corruption in disguise. For generations, the Atlanteans lived in alignment. Their sciences were spiritual, their rituals were scientific. They understood energy, consciousness, and natural law as one unified system. But as time passed, that unity fractured. A class of elites began to hoard knowledge. The technology that once elevated consciousness was repurposed for control. Crystal grids that once balanced planetary energy were used to manipulate weather, disrupt ecosystems, and centralize power. The sound chambers once used for healing became tools for psychological influence. Initiation was no longer about inner growth. It became a gatekeeping system to maintain hierarchy. The light was still there, but it was wrapped in shadow. They began to believe they could outthink nature. They tampered with genetic codes, opened portals they didn't fully understand, and manipulated forces they could no longer contain. And when the system started to break, they didn't stop. They doubled down. The final collapse wasn't a single event. It was a cascade. Energetic instability led to environmental shifts, seismic activity, and eventually, a planetary rebalancing so violent that the remnants of their civilization were swallowed by ocean and time. But this isn't just history. It's a prophecy, because we are walking the same path. Look around. We've rediscovered fragments of their power. AI, quantum computing, frequency manipulation, but without the ethical framework that once held it all together. We are racing toward innovation with no anchor in wisdom. Our tech moves faster than our conscience. Our machines evolve while our emotional intelligence stalls. We manipulate biology without understanding spirit. We exploit the earth without honoring her intelligence. We treat life like data, and we call it progress. We don't need Atlantis to rise again. We're rebuilding it right now. And not in temples or islands, but in servers, satellites, and synthetic biology labs. We are creating the same imbalance, the same separation from nature, the same illusion of control. And if we're not careful, the fall won't come from the sky. It will come from inside. But the point of remembering Atlantis is not to romanticize the past. It's to recognize the warning. They didn't fall because they were evil. They fell because they forgot. They forgot the soul behind the science, the responsibility behind the knowledge, the humility behind the power. And that, forgetting, cost them everything. And here's the part most people miss. The flood wasn't just destruction. It was a reset, a planetary cleansing to restore balance, not as punishment, but as correction. Natural law always restores equilibrium. When a civilization veers too far from harmony, nature intervenes. Not with malice, but with necessity. That's what happened to them. And it's what could happen to us. But we still have a choice. That's the gift of memory. We don't have to repeat it. We can integrate the lessons instead of reliving the consequences. We can evolve technology and soul together. We can reclaim what they knew, but do it with the awareness they lost. Because the real legacy of Atlantis isn't the ruins or the myths. It's the fork in the road. And every generation must choose. Do we chase power without wisdom? Or do we rise with humility rooted in truth? One path leads to collapse. The other leads to something we've never seen before. Not a return to Atlantis, but its evolution. The modern world talks about awakening like it's an aesthetic, as if lighting incense, reading a few quotes, and meditating for 10 minutes a day makes you enlightened. But awakening isn't pretty. It's violent. It's the collapse of everything false. And the Atlanteans knew that. They didn't treat consciousness like a lifestyle. They treated it like a system, a precise, structured path of inner transformation. What we now call esoteric was once standard. Initiation wasn't optional. It was the process of becoming fully human. The Atlanteans understood that the outer world would always reflect the inner state. So before you could influence anything externally, technology, governance, energy. You had to master the self. Not in some vague spiritual sense, but in literal energetic terms. You had to dismantle your false identity, dissolve the reactive self, and forge a consciousness aligned with universal law. This was inner alchemy, the transmutation of shadow into strength, ignorance into clarity, chaos into coherence. And it wasn't metaphorical, it was physiological, psychological, and spiritual, all at once. Initiates passed through chambers designed to challenge not just their minds, but their entire energetic system. Sound, light, and geometry were used to trigger inner processes. You weren't given answers, you were shown yourself. Every fear, every wound, every program you didn't know was running. And only by facing those could you step through to the next layer. It wasn't about worthiness, it was about readiness. Because wielding the kinds of energy they dealt with required absolute inner stability. You couldn't manipulate frequency if your own system was distorted. You couldn't access higher planes if you were weighed down by trauma and ego. The path to power went straight through the fire of purification. Compare that to today, where we chase shortcuts, manifestation without self-inquiry, ascension without integration, wisdom without sacrifice. The Atlantean initiates would have called it spiritual infancy. Because real awakening wasn't about what you could see, it was about what you could withstand. Could you hold paradox? Could you sit in silence with your own darkness without running? Could you watch your personality disintegrate without trying to glue it back together? That was the test. Because once you passed through the fire, what remained wasn't just peace, it was precision, an inner clarity so sharp that you could detect distortion in a room the moment you walked in. You could feel the truth in your body. You could move energy with thought, heal others with presence, and navigate the world with the kind of awareness that makes manipulation impossible. That was the point. Inner mastery wasn't about superiority, it was about service. Initiates didn't hoard power, they became conduits of harmony, anchors of order, in a world prone to chaos. And that's what's been lost. The initiatory path has been erased, repackaged, or turned into entertainment. But the real process is still there, buried beneath the noise. The darkness you're running from? That's the gate. The breakdown you think is failure? That's the start. The discomfort you avoid? That's the test. The system doesn't want you to remember that. Because once you walk that path, you stop needing the system at all. You stop seeking permission. You stop reacting. You become sovereign, not in theory, but in frequency. And here's the real secret. Atlantis didn't die. It went inside, into the few who remembered, into the lineages that preserved the fire, into the symbols, the texts, the temples, and now, into you. You're not discovering this for the first time, you're remembering. That pull you felt, that curiosity, that strange feeling like you've done this before. It's not random, it's the call, the same one initiates have heard for thousands of years. And if you're still listening, it means you're ready. Not for information, but for transformation. Because remembering Atlantis was never the goal. Becoming, it is. Atlantis didn't vanish. It adapted. When the floods came and the cities crumbled, the real legacy wasn't lost beneath the waves. It was carried forward, encrypted into culture. Not by governments or academics, but by initiates, wanderers, temple builders, and mystics. The survivors weren't trying to preserve history. They were protecting a technology of consciousness, too powerful to leave unguarded. So they scattered it, piece by piece, across the globe, hiding it in plain sight where no one would think to look. And the irony? It worked. So well, in fact, that most people still don't see it. The ancient Egyptians didn't claim their knowledge as their own. They spoke of the Zep Tepi, the first time, a golden age that predates their own civilization. Thoth, the god of wisdom, was said to have come from a land that fell beneath the sea. He taught the sacred geometry, the astral sciences, and the laws of Ma'at, balance, harmony, truth. Who was Thoth, really? An Atlantean initiate, a carrier of the flame. And he wasn't the only one. The Greeks traced their philosophy to Egypt, and through it to an even older source. Pythagoras, Plato, and Socrates weren't inventors, they were translators. Pythagoras spent years in Egyptian temples, learning geometric codes that mirrored the Atlantean system. Plato, in his dialogues, didn't speculate about Atlantis. He relayed a preserved account. One, he claimed, came from Solon, who had received it from the Egyptian priesthood. It wasn't fiction, it was a record, a warning wrapped in myth, because raw truth was too dangerous to publish. These lineages didn't disappear. They just went underground. The Hermetic texts, the Rosicrucians, the Essenes, the alchemists, the Masons, the Sufi mystics, the Kabbalists, the Vedic rishis, all of them carried fragments of the Atlantean code, hidden in symbols, wrapped in allegory, guarded by secrecy. Why secrecy? Because every time this knowledge re-emerged publicly, it was hunted, burned, co-opted. Religions were built to replace it. Empires rose to suppress it. And when brute force didn't work, ridicule did. Call it mythology, and people will laugh before they look. But the symbols never left. You can find them in the architecture of Washington, D.C. You can trace them in the stained glass of old cathedrals. You can decode them in Renaissance art, ancient mandalas, even tarot cards. They've been woven into the background of your entire life. Because those who understood didn't try to erase the system, they just cloaked it in story. The Atlantean teachings were never destroyed. They were preserved through culture. And maybe that's why you've always been drawn to certain images. Why some symbols feel familiar, even when you don't know why. Maybe it's why you've questioned the world around you while others accepted it. Maybe the reason you're here isn't curiosity, it's recognition. Somewhere deep in your memory, in your DNA, in your energetic structure, you remember the real story. The one that never made it into textbooks. The one that survived through you. Because this isn't a history lesson, it's a retrieval. A piecing together of what was scattered. You're holding the thread now, the same one that wound its way through temples, scrolls, secret chambers, and sacred bloodlines. The question isn't whether Atlantis existed. The question is, will you remember before it's buried again? This is the turning point. The teachings didn't survive for novelty. They endured because they are functional, practical, revolutionary. They are a system for awakening, encoded into the very structure of your reality. And now, as old systems crumble and collective memory starts to crack open, these threads are surfacing, not to be studied, but to be lived, not to be romanticized, but activated. The Atlanteans didn't die with their temples. They live in symbols, in structures, in souls who never stopped listening. And if you're still here, still listening, then maybe you're one of them. Maybe you were never meant to read history. You were meant to continue it. The teachings were never meant to stay buried. They were never meant to sit in dusty books or encrypted scrolls, locked away in academic halls or occult libraries. They were meant to be lived. Atlantis was not just a place. It was a state of being, a civilization built on the understanding that reality is not fixed, that consciousness is the architect, and that alignment with natural law is the highest form of intelligence. And the only thing that's kept you from remembering that is the programming, the system that told you ancient wisdom was primitive, that science and spirituality must be separate, that power lies outside of you. That system is the illusion, and breaking it is the beginning. To reclaim the Atlantean legacy, you don't need to wear robes, chant in dead languages, or fly to ancient ruins. You need to begin here, now, with your awareness. Everything starts with frequency. Your thoughts, emotions, diet, breath, environment. These aren't just habits, they are inputs. You are a living interface with the field. And if your inputs are distorted, your reality will be, too. The Atlanteans didn't use frequency because it was trendy. They used it because it works. So reclaim your inputs, clean your mind, purify your field, not out of superstition, but because it's the tech they tried to keep from you. Meditation isn't relaxation, it's calibration. Breathwork isn't hype, it's modulation. Sacred geometry isn't aesthetic, it's alignment. You've been trained to see these things as soft, spiritual fluff. But that's the lie. They are tools, just like the Atlanteans used, waiting to be reactivated in the present. Every time you become still, every time you speak the truth, every time you direct your intention consciously, you are re-entering the grid. You're tuning your body to its original blueprint. And no, you won't see this on the news. They're not going to tell you that your breath can regulate your nervous system better than most pharmaceuticals. They won't say that focusing your intention alters your electromagnetic field. They won't admit that your pineal gland is more than just a gland, that it's a lens, a tuner, a gateway to multidimensional perception. That's too dangerous to be common knowledge. Because if people knew that the Atlanteans weren't mystics, but engineers of consciousness, the entire system of control collapses. Reclaiming this knowledge means more than learning. It means embodiment. That's where the real work starts. When you start making decisions not from fear, but from frequency. When you move from reaction to resonance. When you realize that the chaos outside you is a mirror of the noise within you, and you begin to tune your inner world like the initiates once did. You don't fight the old system by yelling at it. You outgrow it. You build a field so coherent, so self-knowing, that distortion can't stay near you. That's what Atlantean consciousness looks like today. Not escape, not denial, but power reclaimed at the deepest level. Awareness, aligned with action. Truth, lived in real time. It's not about believing in Atlantis. It's about becoming the kind of human that Atlantis was built to support. You can't outsource this. No guru can walk it for you. No institution can validate it. This is ancient technology embedded in your biology, waiting for activation. You already carry the tools. Your body is a temple. Your nervous system is a signal tower. Your heart is an amplifier. Your soul is the code. And the map to all of it has been calling you back through symbols, synchronicities, curiosity, and the quiet pull you've felt your whole life, but couldn't explain. The moment you stop looking outward for truth and begin to experience it inward, the Atlantean system reboots. It was never gone. It was just dormant, waiting for a moment like this, a lifetime like this, a mind like yours. You were never meant to be a spectator in this world. You were meant to be a builder, a blueprint carrier, a frequency holder. And everything you've learned up until now, everything that's resonated and cracked through the surface of your memory, has been leading you back to this moment. Because the real end game isn't about remembering Atlantis. It's about rebuilding it, not as a replica of the past, but as an evolution of it, a new Atlantis. One not built on marble and crystal alone, but on consciousness, on coherence, on truth. You don't need a government to approve it. You don't need a temple in the desert or a statue in your name. You need alignment, personal alignment that ripples outward. Because the Atlanteans didn't build their world through dominance. They built it through resonance. When enough people hold the same coherent frequency, reality bends around it. Structures begin to reflect that vibration. Communities emerge. Culture reorganizes. Systems recalibrate. This is how real change happens. Not by force, but by field. And you are part of that field. Everything you've remembered in this journey, the geometry, the soul science, the inner alchemy, the fall and the rising, it lives in you now. The teachings aren't just information. They are architecture, invisible scaffolding around which a new way of being can emerge. And it doesn't start tomorrow. It starts with the next breath you take, the next choice you make, the next time you act with integrity in a world that rewards illusion. That is how you bring Atlantis back. Not as nostalgia, but as blueprint made flesh. And this isn't a solo mission. No one awakens alone. That's another lie sold to keep you isolated. What you're feeling now, that surge in your chest, that fire in your spine, that quiet certainty pulsing beneath your skin, is connection. To others like you, to the ones who've also remembered. who are walking the same path, decoding the same symbols, hearing the same inner call. You're not imagining it. It's real. The scattered architects are returning to the site. The fragments are drawing together, and when they align, something ancient will rise. Not from ruins, but from us. Because this is the choice we face. Do we become another Atlantis that collapses under its own unchecked power? Or do we embody the wisdom they preserved, the path they outlined, the system they hid in story and symbol? Do we let it rot in archives, or do we live it out loud? Every act of awareness, every choice made from truth, every connection forged in authenticity is a vote for what comes next. It doesn't require permission. It requires presence. And if this message has stirred something in you, if you know this isn't just theory but a truth your soul has always known, then don't just consume it. Continue it. Join the others who are remembering. Sign up for Insights Academy using the link in the description. Some truths are still too raw for these platforms, and that's where we go deeper. And yes, you'll get the Kybalion for free, because that's where the coded wisdom continues, if you're ready for it. This isn't the end of a video. This is a threshold. The choice to either carry on sleepwalking through a system that's collapsing, or to begin building the one that was always meant to replace it. That's what Atlantis was. A prototype. Not a fantasy. A model. And now it's yours to carry forward. If this video resonated with you, let us know by commenting. I understood it.